Our speaker is Régis Behmo, who has been a long-time contributor to the Openx platform, especially its underpinnings for installation and operations. He is the creator of Tutor, which was a third-party supporting mechanism for installing OpenNX and has been chosen by the Build Test Release Working Group as the only supported mechanism for installing the next release, which is Maple, which is due to be released next Monday, the 20th. I'll be moderating. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat on the left. Be sure to choose to everyone in order to make clear so that we can see the questions. If you could put room 1 or Régis or Tutor into the question also, just so that room 2 doesn't get confused and think it's a question for them, that could help. Probably the questions will sort themselves out naturally given the 2 different topics, but you never know. So Régis, are you ready to take it away? Régis has shared his screen. If you don't see his screen large, there's a tile at the top of the window that you can select to see his slides. Take it away, Régis.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ned. So yeah, I'm Régis Behmo. I'm a freelance software engineer. Like Ned explained, I've been working on OpenX for a couple of years now, and I am the principal maintainer of the Tutor project, which is what I would like to tell you about today. My impression is that most people have heard or have used Tutor before, but maybe the community doesn't have the full perspective on the impact that Tutor can have on OpenX. So I wanted to share with you my perspective, my own perspective. Can you hear me well? Is the setup fine?
Yep.
I'm always worried about my internet connection.
No, for once your mic is good.
Cool. So at its core, Tutor is a pip installable package. So it's written in Python, with which you can launch a production-ready OpenX instance in just one command, and that is Tutor local quick start. You will be asked a couple of interactive questions, and after a couple of minutes, you will have a full-fledged, well, not a full-fledged, you will have an OpenX platform running and ready for production. So in this example, we configured the platform to be in Chinese, because why not? And that's the name of the platform. And so if you run this command, after a couple of minutes, you will end up with this, which is a working OpenX installation. And when I set out to create Tutor, and when I started working on this project, this was really the able to run OpenX in a single command. And that would be, my goal was to meet the fundamental need in what I call the OpenX hierarchy of needs. That's to install, admin, and upgrade OpenX. That's basically what everybody wants to do with OpenX. And I wanted to be able to do that in a reliable manner. And in my book, reliable means 3 things. It means understandable, repeatable, and fast. So I tried to make Tutor understandable by providing an intuitive command line interface. Also, Tutor is a wrapper on top of Docker, Docker Compose, or kubectl commands, which are transparently printed in the standard output so that you know at all times what Tutor is doing, and it's not a black box. All of the OpenX and Tutor data is stored in one single folder, which makes it very easy to backup, migrate, or uninstall your OpenX installation. Installing an OpenX platform with Tutor is repeatable because by design, it runs inside Docker containers, and Docker containers are stateless processes. Also, most of the Tutor commands are idempotent, which means that they will have the same effect whether you run them twice or just once. Tutor is pretty fast by leveraging the Docker layer cache mechanism, and also because when you run Tutor, you end up with a minimal a core OpenX platform, although that can be changed as we will see a bit later. So you can learn more about Tutor at the following links. There's the documentation, the PyPy project, the source code, of course, on GitHub, and the Tutor dedicated forum, where you can ask all of your questions. As Ned mentioned, Tutor will be the default supported community installation option starting from Maple. That's next week. And one of the future plans is to actually replace the dev stack. So I thought maybe I would take the chance, use this chance to give a special thanks on this slide to the maintainers of the Tutor project. So there's a group of people who help maintain Tutor, so you can hack onto Open-edX. I felt that the next level that had to be met in the Open-edX hierarchy of needs was a production-ready theme. So I set out to create just that, and it is called Indigo. It's also available. The next level was creating an analytics solution, and I created Cairn, which is now part of the Tutor Wizard edition. So it's a premium extension to Tutor. So the point of this slide is to show you that there are so many things that you can build with Tutor, but Tutor doesn't do that much by itself. Actually, Tutor does only 3 things. Tutor does configuration management, template rendering, and provide a nice command line interface. And the important thing is that all of these components are extendable with plugins. And actually, this is so important that I wrote that in rainbow colors. So let's dive a bit deeper into each one of these 3 components. With Tutor, you can manage the configuration of your platform. So in this example, for instance, we define the LMS_host setting, which is the host at which your Open-edX platform will be running. So once you save this setting using this simple command, the LMS host variable will be stored inside the config.yaml file, again, inside this Tutor folder. Tutor uses this configuration, this set of configuration values, to render some templates. For instance, here's the lms.env.json template, which contains a reference to the LMS_host setting. And when Tutor renders this template, the value of the LMS host is replaced by, well, the LMS domain. Finally, Tutor provides a nice command line interface to make it easy to perform frequent system administration tasks. So for instance, Quick Start helps you launch a platform from scratch, and this is also what you use to upgrade and to apply changes. There's also a command for creating a user, importing a demo course, and also for scaling, for instance, the number of replica of the LMS on Kubernetes to a greater number than just one. And as I mentioned, all of these components are extendable by plugins. So creating a plugin is pretty easy. There's a cookie cutter for that. So you use cookie cutter to generate the scaffold of your plugin, add some stuff there, then you install your plugin, enable it, and you can run Quick Start, and your changes will be applied to your Open-edX platform. The plugin mechanism in Tutor hooks into each one of the 3 components: configuration management, template rendering, and the command line interface. And there are tons of stuff that you can do with plugins. So I listed here a couple examples of plugins that exist. The first line is a list of plugins that are officially maintained inside the Overhang.io organization on GitHub. So there's student notes, e-commerce, there's the Richie course catalog. You can also build an Android app for your platform, etc. EduNext built a fantastic plugin for running arbitrary Python code inside Open-edX. This is useful for Python evaluated input units in the courseware. And as I mentioned, the Tutor Wizard edition includes a few commercial plugins, including the Cairn Analytics plugin. So why am I mentioning this. It's not just a shameless plug for the Tutor Wizard edition. My point is that plugins are both a way to improve platform reliability and also a standard way of shipping innovative features to all of the OpenEdX instances out there. And it's also a new distribution channel for your business. So you can sell new services via the Tutor, Tutor plugin. So I'm saying that plugins improve platform reliability because with plugins, people do not have to fork your project. And this is really crucial because once people fork your project, they're basically gone from the community. It's really difficult for them to rebase their changes on top of the master branch. So you really want to avoid that. And Tutor really brings about greater diversity, both in the community and in the range of scenarios that OpenEdX platform can address. And the ease of use also attracts many more people to the community, and we want that, right? So this is an interesting question. Like, do we actually want to attract more people to OpenEdX?
Yes.
And this is a question that was asked to me at the very beginning of the Tutor project. So when I first started working on Tutor, it was initially not on Tutor, it was on an installation manual for running OpenEdX from scratch on a server. So the installation manual included step-by-step instructions. And when I first pitched the idea to you, Ned, about this manual, well, your first answer was, why would you want to do that? Is that something else that we would have to support? And another reaction that I heard is that maybe OpenEdX administration should be left to experts. And I've heard that from many people. There are many people who would like you to believe that running OpenEdX is difficult and you should not be doing it. I'm looking at you, SaaS providers. And that I'm trying to convince you otherwise, and this is a technical talk, so I made a graph. On this graph, I plotted contributor proficiency as a function of time. So this is also called the learning curve. And so for instance, there's Alice on this graph. Alice is a fairly proficient system engineer. She knows Django, Python, React, Docker, and she quickly reaches the point where she can be called an expert. Bob, on the other hand, is also very strong, a software engineer, but he doesn't spend enough time on the platform to ever be considered an expert. And then you have Charlie. Charlie is young and eager to learn, but he doesn't know anything about, well, software engineering or system administration. But he spends a lot of time on OpenEdX, and after a couple of years, well, he becomes acknowledged by his peers. And the thing is that when you put a high barrier to entry on the software that you produce, you exclude all the Charlies of the world. So my point with this graph is that by making software more simple, you end up with more experts in your community. And I think that's an important point. Maybe you're not convinced, so I made another graph. On this graph, I plotted the cost of development of any task as a function of its complexity. And I made the assumption that cost is an affine function of complexity. So every task incurs a setup cost. And then the slope of the line is something that I call the resistance to change. And the bad thing about the setup cost is that it proportionally most affects the easiest tasks. So every time you want to fix a typo, fix a simple bug, make a small refactor, then you have to spin up a new development environment. So this is something that you have to pay every single time. And the resistance to change, meaning the difficulty of working with OpenEdX, will impact the maximum complexity of the task that you will be able to address as a function of your budget. So the conclusion of this graph is that less complexity means actually cheaper software, and not just for experts, for everyone. So my goal with Tutor was really to make Open more accessible for everyone. And I think that as a community, we should really be asking this question. Like, what do we want to achieve? What do we want to achieve with Tutor or OpenEdX? And the answer to that question is actually fairly straightforward. I believe in the edX mission statement, which is to increase access to high-quality education for everyone everywhere, enhance teaching and learning on campus and online, advance teaching and learning through research. Basically what Anand Agarwal summarized in when he said, "I want to teach 1 billion learners." Yes, this is a bold statement, but I wholeheartedly agree with it. And yet, OpenEdX hasn't really reached that point where we teach 1 billion learners. So I think that we need to reflect on what we want to do. And for that, we need to think about what works and what doesn't in the OpenEdX world. So what works? edX.org works great. It has its system works really well as well. There are many OpenEdX instances which are spun up around the world. And I like to think that Tutor is for something in this growth. OpenEdX manages to attract high-quality third-party contributions, including for core committers. So the core committer program is, I think, a resounding success. Also, working groups are working really well, in particular the build, test, release working groups. I think that the decision process there is really smooth. And I also think that Tutor as a package manager for shipping innovation and extensions to OpenX works really well. Now, what doesn't work yet? There has always been this disconnect between edX and the rest of the OpenEdX community. So for instance, for a long time, there was no public roadmap. This, I just learned this a couple of days ago. This is starting to change, which is why I'm optimistic about this. And also, developers at edX had for a long time, they were oblivious to the fact that there are other OpenEdX instances running out there. Then I think that what doesn't work is commitment and ownership by third parties, which is that if you publish an extension to OpenEdX, then you must commit to maintaining it every time a new release comes out. And this is crucial for maintaining community confidence. We now ship OpenEdX new releases every 6 months, and it is vital that people keep up with this pace of releases. Finally, so this ownership problem is something that I summarize as if you break it, you fix it. And I'm thinking, of course, about the recent issue about e-commerce. But again, I'm confident that we're drawing the right conclusions about this incident, and it will not happen in the future, in particular with T-Krill. But we also need to ask the tough questions, like what doesn't work at all? How do we reach this point where OpenEdX is used to teach billions of people around the world? How do we provide universal access to higher education to everyone? And T-Krill, the name of T-Krill is Reimagining Learning, and I love this name. For me, reimagining is a synonym for to revolutionize. And I think that we stand really at a crossroad. It's a historical moment, not just for OpenEdX, but for the world. Now, if you think about it, a nonprofit which has extensive experience in online education is now endowed with a huge sum of money, and its goal is to reimagine education from scratch. This is really a unique opportunity to question some of the core assumptions that are boundaries, limitations to other projects. And I think we're extremely lucky to be able to contribute to this future. And I think that one of the new realities that we need to face is that education is just not a business. We have explored education as a business before. MIT, Harvard, edX, but also Coursera and others have explored this. So education as a business means centralization and profitability. And these are old world models which will not help us reach 1 billion learners. In order to reach this ambitious goal of ours, education must be free, open, and decentralized. It must be based on technology that is not adversarial. And by adversarial, I mean limiting access to courses depending on how much you pay, either in terms of content or on time. And this is, of course, what's happening on edX.org. So really, if we want to reach this very ambitious goal, we should not be attempting to replicate startups, which will not work. Instead, we should be trying to emulate something like the Wikimedia Foundation. So let me conclude with this slide, which includes proposed actions. So first of all, we should be publicly discussing the Openx Roadmap. And I was really happy to watch Ed's presentation earlier. And I know that there have been some efforts being made in that direction recently. In particular, there's now a platform roadmap repo, which is public in the OpenX GitHub organization. Right now, the conversation mostly revolves around SaaS OpenX providers and universities, and we need to bring nonprofit organizations to the table. Also, we need to publish course content under a Creative Commons license to make it possible for everyone everywhere to access courses, and not just in a specific time frame. We must leverage the huge number of OpenEdX instances running around the world by implementing content and access federation. And we must build a global community of learners. We must. Forum have been terrible in OpenEdX ever since I started working on OpenEdX, and we need to address that. And I'm well aware that OpenEdX needs to be sustainable. And I think that we've learned from our experience with edX that centralization does not work. So we need to be able to raise, to support OpenX financially through a network of partners. And that would take the form of a foundation, I believe. That's my final slide. If you'd like to keep having this conversation after the conference, you can reach out to me using my email address. I'm also on the forum. I would like to take this chance to thank all the people who contributed to the Maple release. You rock, guy. Everyone there can thank these people by pressing the Z key. It will make your little avatar dance. And now I'm open to questions. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thank you, Régis. I want to just clarify one thing. Régis said at one point that I said something like, why do we want more people using OpenEdX? And that was a conflation of two different discussions. I have always been in favor of growing OpenEdX as strongly and aggressively as possible.
Yeah, and one thing that I forgot to mention that is that, so when Ned asks you a question that sounds naive, it most certainly isn't. It's just a way for you to clarify your thoughts.
That's true. So we have time for about 5 minutes of questions. One comment about the Creative Commons license. That's not for any CC license. I would recommend to follow the open definition. So yes, Creative Commons has a number of licenses. Some are more appropriate for open courseware than others.
Yeah, so I used to be an author for a platform called Open Classrooms. It's a French platform which includes courses, and it's not based on OpenEdX. It's one of the few profitable companies on online learning in France, and they do publish their courses under a Creative Commons license. So I think it's possible to make money and publish course content for free.
There's a question that's been directed to room 1, but it actually sounds like a room 2 question. So I'm asking room 1, I'd be interested to hear more about what is meant by cross-instance content and access federation. And the second question is, how do you see federation working? So we can wrap that all together.
Yeah, So Open edX has this concept of course snippets, which can be shared between courses on a single platform. And I think we need to expand on that, and we need to share course content between different organizations. So if MIT has an amazing computer science course, it doesn't make sense for me to just copy paste the content. I should be able to fetch the content from their own instance. So maybe that could work with LTI. So this is what I call content federation. And then access federation would basically be something akin to SSO. If you learn something somewhere, then you should be able to learn something else elsewhere, and without having to create a new account and having to jump through the hoops of account creation, basically making learning a smoother process.
Right. And just to clarify, if MIT has an awesome computer science course, which I'm sure they do, you are not necessarily allowed to copy the content out of it. You should always check the copyright and licensing of materials that you find online. Other questions for Régis? Maybe not. All right then, Régis, thank you very much. Tutor is very impressive, and I appreciate the plea for the governance of open source to accomplish the mission. So we started from very on the entire mechanisms of the community, which is very interesting. Ed mentions that you can see the ongoing improvements to the forums in a link, which we will provide somehow.
Yeah, I got notifications about that in the past couple of days. I'm really curious to learn more.
We have one last question. Will Tutor be helpful for upgrading versions from version to version? For instance,
yes.
From Lilac to Maple.
Yes. So this was maybe I didn't think to talk about this, because this has been at the core of Tutor since the very beginning. So to upgrade OpenNX, you just pip install upgrade Tutor, and then to run Tutor local quick start again, and it will upgrade your entire platform. And this was really one of the goals of Tutor, because there were so many people stuck on older releases of OpenNX. Ginkgo users, I'm looking at you, and really one of the goals of Tutor was to make sure that everyone keeps the pace with the rhythm of releases. And by the way, if you are not running Lilac, you might be susceptible to log4j security issue. So this might incentivize you to upgrade.
Yeah, and as well as other issues. There are always security fixes applied to the releases, and newer releases will have them, and older releases will stop getting them. So it's always a good idea to upgrade. Okay, thank you very much, Régis. For the next half hour, we can use the open space below, either to join a Birds of a Feather discussion or just mingle and chat. Thanks all for coming.